a 30-year-old climber known for moving faster on some of America's most difficult walls than most people thought possible, is dead after a climbing-related accident in California's Sierra Nevada. His name was Jake Whisenant. For many people outside the climbing world, his name may have appeared suddenly in the news. But inside the climbing community, Whisenant was already known as an exceptionally fast and accomplished climber. Someone who spent years pushing himself against some of the most demanding rock faces in the United States. Now, his death has sent shockwaves through the climbing community and is drawing growing attention across the country. Jake Whisenant was 31 in California. He was originally from Arizona and later studied environmental studies at the University of Santa Barbara. But climbing became one of the defining parts of his life. And not ordinary climbing. Whisenant became particularly known for speed climbing, attempting extremely difficult routes in remarkably short periods of time. One of the places where he made his biggest mark was Yosemite National Park. And if you have ever seen El Capitan, you understand why his achievements were so extraordinary. El Capitan is a massive granite formation rising thousands of feet above Yosemite Valley. For climbers, it is one of the most famous big walls on Earth. Routes that look almost impossible from the ground can require enormous physical strength, technical skill, planning, and concentration. Some climbers spend multiple days completing major routes on El Capitan. Whisenant and his climbing partners were trying to do something very different. They were trying to move as quickly as possible. In October 2024, Jake Whisenant and Brant Heisel completed the Lurking Fear route on El Capitan in approximately 2 hours and 55 minutes. The recorded time was 2 hours, 55 minutes and 32 seconds. That was an extraordinary achievement and became one of the performances that helped establish Whisenant's reputation in the climbing world. Think about what that means. A route on a gigantic wall where climbers can spend days was completed by Whisenant and Heisel in less than 3 hours. And that was not the end of his accomplishments. In 2025, Whisenant was also part of another very fast ascent on Yosemite's Washington Column.
Then, in May 2026, he accomplished another remarkable feat. Whisenant and Noah Fox climbed Yosemite's famous nose route on El Capitan twice in a single day. The total time was reported as 14 hours and 38 minutes. For most people, simply looking at El Capitan from the valley is intimidating. For Whisenant, it had become a place where he repeatedly tested the limits of what was possible. But then came August 2026, and this chimney the clay. According to authorities and multiple news reports, Whisenant died following a fall during a climbing-related incident in the Sequoia Kings Canyon wilderness of California's Sierra Nevada. The incident occurred during an attempt at what has been described as a first ascent. Officials confirmed the death and a search and recovery operation followed. The exact circumstances surrounding the fall have not all been publicly established. That point is important. There have been questions online about what happened, whether he was climbing alone, whether equipment failed, and exactly where and how the fall occurred. But those details should not be presented as confirmed facts unless authorities or reliable reporting establish them. What is known is that Whisenant suffered a fatal fall while climbing in the Sierra Nevada. His death was confirmed at the age of just 30, and that is one of the reasons the story has hit so hard. 30 years old. At an age when many people are only beginning to reach the peak of their careers. Whisenant had already established himself as a serious figure in the world of speed climbing. People who knew him have described him not simply as an incredible athlete, but as someone who loved the outdoors and lived intensely. His fiancée est Malandon. And friends remembered a person who was deeply passionate about nature, adventure, and the places where he climbed. That human side of the story is becoming just as important as the records. Because behind the numbers, the climbing times, and the difficult routes was a person whose friends and family knew him very differently. From the way a headline might describe him, he was not simply the guy who climbed El Capitan fast. He was a son, a fiancé, a friend, a climber, and someone who had built his life around experiences that many people would consider impossible. His story also raises a difficult question. Why do people climb mountains and walls where one mistake can have devastating consequences? For climbers, the answer is rarely as simple as chasing danger. There is a sense of freedom. There is the challenge of solving a route. There is the physical and mental discipline. And there is the experience of being completely focused on one moment. For a speed climber like Whisenant, the challenge becomes even more extreme. Speed climbing requires movement, communication, route knowledge, physical endurance, and decision-making under pressure.
Onauhiwal matters, but so does every decision. A tiny mistake can have consequences that are impossible to reverse. That is part of what makes Whisenant's achievements so impressive, and also what makes his death so tragic. He spent years becoming better at managing risk in an environment where risk can never be completely eliminated. And now, one of the climbers who appeared to be operating at an extraordinary level is gone. The news has also produced a strong reaction among climbers who knew him personally or had encountered him in Yosemite. Messages of grief have spread throughout climbing communities, with people remembering Whisenant as friendly, passionate, hardworking, and exceptionally talented. Some climbers have described him as one of the most impressive people they had ever seen on a wall. Others have focused on something simpler: his personality, his kindness, his enthusiasm, and the fact that he was only 30. There is another remarkable detail that makes this story even more striking. Only weeks before his death, Whisenant had continued to pursue demanding objectives in the mountains. In July 2026, a record database lists Whisenant completing the North Arete of Bear Creek, Spire in California, in 3 hours, 49 minutes, and 40 seconds.
That means his climbing activity was not something that belonged only to his past. He was still actively pushing himself in the mountains, still exploring, still climbing, still searching for the next challenge. And then, suddenly, there was no next climb. That is why the story has become more than a sports story. It is a story about ambition, about risk, about what people choose to dedicate their lives to, and about how quickly a life can change. Jake Whisenant's name became associated with speed, records, and extraordinary climbs. But perhaps his legacy will be larger than a stopwatch, because every time climbers look at El Capitan, they will remember the people who pushed themselves across its walls. And Whisenant was one of them. His 2024 Lurking Fear ascent with Brant Heysel remains one of the clearest examples of just how fast and technically capable he had become. Less than 3 hours on a route that most people could not even imagine climbing. And in 2026, he climbed the nose twice in one day. Those accomplishments will remain part of the record. But records eventually get broken. Times eventually get beaten. Routes eventually get climbed faster. What does not disappear as easily as the memory of the person who was there? Jake Whisenant's death is now being mourned by a community that knew exactly how difficult the world he chose to live in could be. For people watching from the outside, the story may look like a headline about a dangerous sport. But for the people who knew him, it was the loss of a 30-year-old man who loved climbing, loved the mountains, and had much more life ahead of him. The authorities' investigation and any future reports may provide more information about exactly what happened during the accident. Until then, the responsible thing is to separate what is confirmed from what is speculation. What we know is simple and heartbreaking. Jake Whisenant went into the Sierra Nevada to climb. He never came back. He was 30 years old. He had already accomplished things on America's biggest, climbing walls that very few people in the world could match. I know. The climbing community is left remembering not only how fast he could climb, but how much he loved being there. Jake Whisenant's story is a reminder that behind every record is a human being. Behind every extraordinary achievement is a person who chose to chase something difficult. And behind today's headline is a family, a fiancé, friends, and an entire community mourning someone they believed had so much more to give. His climbs are over, but his name will remain on the walls of Yosemite's history. And for the people who knew him, Jake Whisenant will be remembered not simply for how fast he climbed, but for how fully he lived.